have to choose. They don't need to choose, they don't have to choose. This is something which has been determined by society. And this in itself has caused a lot of confusion from people from mixed heritage backgrounds, especially those from mixed race backgrounds, not so much mixed ethnic backgrounds. Okay? So that's another thing that we can look at later. Multiple identities doesn't just look at where the parents come from, because they could be from two different ethnic groups or two racial groups. It can also be your grandparents as well, and can also look at what type of thing that you do in society, you know, such as your occupation, these type of things, okay? So this is what we mean about multiple identity, because identities necessarily cannot be, society likes to fix identities, and we know this when we fill out the census forms. Yeah, they like to fix identities. Identities in itself cannot be fixed. Identities will always shift between time and place. They will always shift, whether it's based upon a religious or a cultural affiliation, or whether it's based upon your occupation, but identities will always shift. And this is something that we need to recognize. Okay? Social identity is something that we always come across, but we never really know what the understanding or the definition of this actually means. But a social identity is how someone else sees you, how someone else determines you. Okay? So for me, for instance, I see myself, even though I'm Jamaican, I see myself first and foremost as an African. And then I say an African Caribbean as a form of identification to my culture, and obviously a frame of reference with the person who I'm speaking to. But African is my primary identity, I recognize that. Okay? This is not always the case with most African Caribbeans, and there's reasons for this. But the reality that we need to understand is that when we look at identities, identities first start within the home, within the process of socialization, which I'll talk about next. And what makes the identity spoilt or corrupted is when children go out in society and then they're taught something totally different, such as their school friends, such as teachers, such as their peer group friends on the street. So identities will never stay fixed. Okay, they're always shifting. When we look at the process of socialization, socialization basically is where do we learn our value system from? How do we know what we know? So there's two aspects when we look at the process of socialization. There is primary and secondary. And within those scopes, if we look at the first one, say for instance, if you look at primary socialization and we look at the developmental stage, yeah, this is within the child's own lifetime between 0 to 16. Now between that time, there could be conflicting identities taking place. So what was happening is that when it's in the home, the child is in the home, it recognizes his or herself depending on what dynamics that family has already established. As soon as it leaves the home, it shifts. And the reason for that shift is because society or institutions have determined who that child is. So basically there's no sort of consensus between the primary and the secondary home. The primary home is obviously with the family, the secondary home is outside the home, you know, speaking of schools. So this is what we need to understand. So there's a developmental stage for children. And obviously the second aspect, or the secondary development stage, is from 16 plus. By that time, the children have already established who they are. So if they're in groups such as gangs, they've already determined who they are as an individual by that age. They have an affiliation with a particular group, because as social beings, we lean towards collectivity. It is normal, it is natural. Individuality, or this individual thing that we seem to go through, we seem to experience, is basically really a new experience for most people, especially those from Afro-Caribbean descent. Because if we know our history carefully, we know we had a structured system prior to the enslavement period, which started in the 1400s. And then what has taken place over there? Most of their social constructs were stripped away from them, taken away from them. The first thing which was taken away from them was their language. And what goes with language is knowledge of historical past. And this is why I teach history. So what I basically say to my students is that if you really want to understand the essence of the French Revolution, you need to learn French. You cannot speak or try to interpret the essence of the French Revolution by using English or German. And this is what we need to understand. Language is an important denominator in knowing who the person is. And that's something which I'll talk about later. So there's 2 stages in a child's development of identity. But the identity first must start within the home. Now, the identity which starts in home is known as primary identity, which is something which I'll talk about later again. Primary identity is where mother and father is both in a child's life. What you will find with most children who end up being GANs, the primary identity is not even there. Either there's not a secure mother figure or a secure father figure, which is in that child's home. Do you want to? Right, so what happens is, I've lost my train of thought now.
French Revolution.
Okay, so yes, so we're looking at primary identity. So what happens is, a primary identity deals with the presence of both mother and father in the home. Because this is where the child first learns who he or she is. If there's an absent parent there, the child seems to lose their identity. Now, when you speak to most youngsters who are part of GANs, it's usually because the primary identity has not been established.